When we think of filmmaking and the creative process, most people imagine a clever writer, a creative director, an experienced director of photography, and of course a great editor. But they don't usually imagine just how much of the creative process happens in the final stage of production where the look of the film takes shape. And nowhere is this more important than with giant screen films. I'm talking, of course, about the DI process.
DI is short for Digital Intermediate, and it's a term that goes back to a time when most films were shot and released on film, but the camera negatives were scanned so that the effects and color grading could be completed digitally. The resulting images were then recorded back to film for release in theaters. This type of finishing allowed a great deal more flexibility than the old technique of an entirely photochemical post-production workflow.
However, these days, for most filmmakers, the entire workflow is digital from image capture all the way to projection, so the term digital intermediate is a little redundant. But the term stuck. For the giant screen world, DI is about making the image look great on a big screen. And while many people think it's just about color grading, it's a lot more than that. Let's take a look at some of the common things that happen in a giant screen DI process.
In this process, every shot is evaluated with the goal of making it look its best on the giant screen. Image pre-processing is the first step.
Images that come from 65mm 15 perf film scans are already in the right aspect ratio and have plenty of resolution, but sometimes they have small imperfections. In this shot, we see some flicker, most likely caused by the helicopter rotor blades, and a tiny bit of vignetting in the top left corner from the sunshade. Those can be digitally repaired to make the footage look perfect. In terms of digital capture, most everyone is shooting in 8K now, so if the shot was properly composed for giant screen, it can be cropped to the correct aspect ratio, and you're still left with 6K, which is plenty of resolution. Sometimes, however, you're dealing with a shot from a lower resolution camera that can't be cropped because there isn't enough resolution, or perhaps a shot that was not composed for giant screen. In this case, there are tricks that can help. This drone shot was filmed in 5K. By extending the sky, we can use the whole sensor and keep all the horizontal resolution so it looks tack sharp in the theater. This adorable puffin shot from Ireland was too cute not to use, but it was not composed for giant screen. However, by digitally extending the top of the frame, the composition and resolution is greatly improved over cropping. By adding a little foreground and background blur, we can give it the look of shallower depth of field associated with larger sensor cameras. This also directs the audience's eyes to the thing we want them to see. DI magic. Similarly, this amazing once-in-a-lifetime shot of a blue whale feeding on krill, filmed by Howard Hall, was not composed for giant screen, but we really wanted this shot in Secrets of the Sea. If we crop the shot to 1.43:1, it's really big and high on the screen. We might get away with it on the flat screen, but it would never work on the dome. We could cheat and just run it at 16:9 at the bottom of the frame, which is always an option, but it does sometimes make the shot stand out and it may distract the audience. However, with a little digital magic, we were able to extend the top of the frame so it can work on the dome as well. This type of post work is definitely not the most efficient way to make giant screen films, but it can sometimes save your bacon. Sometimes you have no choice but to shoot on a cloudy day, which never looks great on a dome because of cross reflection. At a minimum, you would grab the sky way down to make it darker and reduce the cross reflection, but that changes the mood to dark and stormy. With a little work, the sky can sometimes be replaced with something much more pleasing. Wow, what a nice day! Occasionally, shots are fine for the flat screen, but need a little help for the dome. In this shot, the camera was positioned as far as possible from the subjects. In the flat version, we can crop to giant screen aspect ratio and it looks fantastic. But on a dome, the shot is a little too close. The Sacred Master overlay proves it. However, if we use the full sensor image and extend the top of the frame, we have pretty good composition for the dome. Keeping in mind how much of the image is cropped out on the dome and the fact that the stretched part is way above the audience's heads, the distortion is largely unnoticeable in the theater. One of the most common things to fix in DI is noise. Whether it's film grain or digital noise from a low-light shot, noise reduction can really make shots look better. Image noise reduction is computationally complex and render times really add up, so it's not something you use unless you really need it. Once all the shots have been conformed to the right aspect ratio, cleaned up, and look nice, then it's time to start grading the film. And that requires what's known as a DI suite. A DI suite replicates the giant screen environment with a calibrated projector at the correct light level and color space. And the screen has to be pretty big so you make grading decisions that will look the same in a giant screen theater.
Make it warmer, a little more, probably a little more. What do you think? Is that good enough for Greg?
Probably not.
The DI supervisor and the director sit close to the screen, while the colorist tweaks the grade on the edit system.
Obviously, bringing a shot into the ballpark is the first step. Get the color, contrast, and overall brightness right. But the director usually has a look he or she wants to impart to the scene. It can look cold. It can look warm. More or less contrasty. If the shot is part of a longer sequence, it has to match the shots before it and after it for consistency. And sometimes those shots are from a different day or a different place, so matching them is not always easy or perfect. An important part of grading the footage often involves what is called secondary correction, where you focus on a particular color or region. Secondary could be used, for example, to make the greens a little greener. Or it could be used to dial down some hot skin tones. Finally, while there are shots for flat and shots for dome, there's also a special grade for dome. Because of cross-reflection in the theater, shots with a very bright top or sides will act like lights turned on in the theater and wash out the center of the frame. So a dome DI pass always involves grads on the bright areas of the top and sides of the frame to reduce cross-reflection. In the theater, these grads are generally not noticeable. Knowing how much to grad is a matter of experience on the part of the DI supervisor. While most giant screen theaters use an aspect ratio of 1.33 or 1.43 to 1, there are also theaters that require a 1.9 to 1 version. And there may eventually be a 1.78 version for consumer video. DI is where all these other versions originate. Each scene must be individually cropped for pleasing composition at the final aspect ratio. Sometimes it's tricky. In this shot from Ancient Caves, we used the full height of the frame to force the audience to look up and follow Gina down into the cave as if the audience was actually in the cave looking up at her. Getting this shot into 1.90 is not possible with a static crop because she'll go out of frame. In this case, we use pan and scan to add what looks like a smooth camera move in post, keeping her in the frame.
Once the DI process has been completed, the film's various versions will be exported as DCPs for test screenings in a theater. This is particularly important for dome versions because the DI suite cannot replicate the dome viewing environment, cross-reflection, or low light levels.
Well, folks, that's it for a quick primer on DI. It's a lot more than just color grading.
And another quick tip, never ask your colorist to touch up your roots.